99% of runners have running form that is slowing them down or getting them injured. And I know all too well how running form can really halt your progress. When I first started running, my running form was absolute rubbish. And yeah, it's probably still rubbish now, but it's improving. In this video, I'll show you exactly how I break down running form, and along the way, I'll also debunk the biggest running myth that I've ever heard. Excuse me, your foot should be landing under your center of mass, otherwise you're overstriding and you're probably gonna get injured and also die. Now, it can be quite hard to pick up certain things with running form, especially if it's not in super slow motion. So first, I'm gonna break down running form into 2 different phases so that you don't feel so overwhelmed. And in each section of this video, I'm gonna give you a checklist so that you can break down your own running form really quickly. So stick around. Now, there are 2 different phases in a running cycle, a swing phase and a stance phase. Now, the swing phase, AKA the boring phase, is the time in which your leg is in the air. And as you can see from this video, the leg is following a circular motion as the leg folds up behind the body and the muscles on the front of the hips shorten to bring the leg back in front of the body. Most of this phase is actually quite passive and it relies on the mobility and the flexibility of your body, specifically the hip flexor muscles. They're the ones on the front. Now, later on in the video, we'll talk a little bit more about how the hips can actually impact your stance phase. But first, let's talk about that stance phase where all of the magic actually happens. Now, the stance phase is the entire time that your foot is actually touching the ground, and generally it's where everything starts to go wrong for most people. Now, this can be due to many factors, but generally for new runners, it's because you haven't yet developed the ability to store lots of energy and release it really efficiently. When we make initial contact with the ground, the intrinsic foot muscles, calf muscles, quad muscles of the front of the leg, and the hip muscles, they all take that load and hold onto it as your upper body moves over your feet. And then when the time is right, your body releases all of that energy to push you back off the ground. From the front, we can see this energy storage system of the foot as we land and compress into what we call supination and pronation. But here's what I would look at in a runner. That as you land, you fall from a supinated position to a pronated position before then pushing off again back into supination. Now, this pronation only really becomes an issue when you actually make initial contact with the ground in full pronation. What this does is that it negates any energy storage that you could have actually had in that step. Now, from the side, we can quickly identify 2 common foot strike patterns, a midfoot or forefoot strike pattern and a heel strike foot pattern. This is my best attempt at heel striking. Now, it's generally accepted that landing on your forefoot allows you to land under your center of mass compared to a heel striking pattern, which you're kind of kicking your leg out a little bit further in front of you, and maybe that's gonna lead to what we call overstriding. So this is what's ruining your running form, right? No. And to explain why it isn't, we have to talk a little bit more about the biggest myth in running today. Your foot should be landing under your center of mass, otherwise you're overstriding. Well, this is not entirely correct, and it's pretty interesting that it's been propagated as a fundamental truth of running for a while now. Because it's pretty clear as day that if you just look at people running, they're slightly overstriding with every step. Elite marathon runners, middle distance runners, even Usain Bolt. But there is one scenario in which this overstriding and heel striking can be a massive issue and can lead to injuries. And it's actually the differentiating factor between elite marathon runners who are heel striking and non-elite runners who are heel striking too. Here's how. Here's a quick quiz. If we look at both Eliud Kipchoge and Qatada in this video, can you guess what biomechanics they have in common that makes them so fast? Now, in a previous video, I compared the stance phase of Eliud Kipchoge to my stance phase, and what I found was pretty interesting. At marathon pace, I clocked an average ground contact time of 210 milliseconds. Which ain't too bad, I guess, but Eliud scored 180 milliseconds of contact time on the ground when he was at his marathon pace. So, big difference, right? And what we can actually see from elite heel strikers like Qatada is that their ground contact time is just as fast as Eliud's ground contact time. And as you can see in this video, Qatada also has quite a bent knee. So it looks like he's not actually activating those quad muscles until he gets over his center of mass. So here's where we go wrong as non-elite athletes. We experience a braking force when this initial foot contact is active. And combining that with a straighter knee angle and a heel strike is a recipe for disaster. So here's a checklist that I use for feet and ankles. Is your cadence between 175 and 185? My advice would be to take shorter and faster strides to get into this zone. A higher cadence can help you actually reduce ground contact time. Also, try to run at that cadence for most of your runs to really cement this in as a fundamental for your running form. You can check what your cadence is by counting how many steps that you can take in 10 seconds and then timesing it by 6. giving you steps per minute. Next one, are you landing on the outside of your foot and rolling to your inside to really activate that spring mechanism in your foot? So to first start modifying your form, rather than focusing on foot strike patterns, maybe let's address cadence and see if that stuff actually just takes care of itself. Usually it does. All right, enough foot talk. Knees, the most complex joint in the body. Here's why. They go forwards and they go backwards. Oh, maybe they're not that complex after all. Now here's the thing. Humans have very specifically designed knees that are really good at standing up for a long period of time because the tibia is actually quite flat on top. Now the key with running is to not overload the knees when they're in standing mode. We want them to be in running mode. And running mode means that they're bent ever so slightly when we hit the ground, like we mentioned before. So knee extension is primarily going to push you up in the air and give you that vertical oscillation. Whereas this next thing that's a little bit higher in the body is really going to be what's going to be powering you horizontally down the road. So here's a checklist. Are you standing on a bent knee when you land? Next. Let's have a look at the legendary Mo Farah from side on. Here we can see probably the best ever hips of any runner to have ever existed, which allowed him to be the middle distance world champion multiple times. But here's what's interesting. Your hips could actually be contributing to the cadence issues that you've been having, as well as that foot contact stuff that we talked about just before. Let's compare my hips during running to Mo Farah. Mo has way more extension, which allows him to propel himself down the road really fast. Now there is one more thing that gives us that horizontal speed, but we'll talk about that one a little bit later. Once Mo leaves the ground, we can actually identify the mobility of his hip by looking at what is called a shin angle. My shin angle is around level or parallel with the floor, and Mo has a positive shin angle. Now to have a shin angle that's higher than level, it means that your hip mobility on the front here, these muscles, has to be pretty bloody good, which I don't quite have, and you probably don't have it either. And this impacts my leg recovery, or the process of taking my leg from behind my body and putting it back in front to put it back on the ground. And if your shin angle's low, then your cadence is probably also going to be quite low as well, because you're not going to be able to have a high turnover. And so you're going to feel like you just have this speed limit on your legs that you just can't run any faster no matter what you do. Now, if we look at hips from the front, here I am standing on one leg. And as you can see, I can actually change this level of the hips by lengthening or shortening my hip muscles on the leg that I'm standing on. Here's what this looks like when running. If we have a hip issue, we will see that our hip drops on our swing face side. And if severe, we could also see that our knees fall together too. So here's what you need to identify with your running. I can't even show you how to do it. Do you have 10 degrees or more of hip extension? Do you have a positive, even, or negative shin angle? And do you have any hip drop? And are your knees falling together when you're running? Now, elite athletes actually hack their hip extension using one more trick that I'm going to talk about soon. But first, let's talk about the shoulders and the arms and how they actually impact your running form. Now, the arms and the shoulders don't touch the ground when you're running. So most people kind of brush over the arms and the shoulders when trying to fix their running form. But here's the thing about the human body. Everything is connected by fascial tissue. And while the lower body can store lots of energy and release it, so too can the upper body when you're running. An example of a runner with great arm mechanics is Josh Kerr. He's an absolute monster at the moment, hey guys? Now on the opposite side of his stance leg, basically the leg that he's extending to push himself along, we can actually see that his arm is powerfully extending in unison to the point where he's probably hitting 80 degrees of shoulder extension. Wow, here's what that's actually doing anatomically. It's actually storing energy in his lat dorsi muscle as well as his lumbopelvic fascia, which actually connects into the glute and the hip structure on the opposite side. So this entire sling of muscles and fascia actually pull together and then release all of that energy when he takes that foot off the ground. And as you can see, I don't have quite as much shoulder extension as Josh Kerr when I'm running. Probably something to work on. So here's a checklist for the shoulders and arms that we need to look at. You need to be able to hit at least 45 degrees or more of shoulder extension when you're running. And I'd also add that the elbows need to be around 90 degrees. We don't want them to be sagging down near our hips because that's going to slow us down. Now this shoulder form and the form that's going on in the legs work really well to store and release energy, but if the thing in the middle is not doing its job too, it's completely pointless. Now your thoracic and lumbar spine assist to counteract the forces of the lower limbs to keep you balanced. Now too much rotation can be a bad thing. So here's what I would aim for. I would try to make sure that our arms don't cross our midline. If they're crossing our midline, we're probably getting way too much thoracic rotation and it's going to be slowing us down. What he said. Now from the side, we want to be able to maintain a really good lumbar extension. And if we look at Mo Farah, we can see that he is maintaining his lumbar curve throughout his running. And this is very important for hip extension. And it's how these elite runners are hacking their way to running faster. Here's how. When you arch your back when running, your hips tend to tilt forward. So this means that your whole joint range actually moves back, meaning that you can increase your hip extension without actually increasing your hip extension. And if we look at this on myself, we can see that this seems to not be too bad.
Full marks on this one too. Sweet.
So here's what we need to have: a slight lumbar curve in the lower back, as well as a slight anterior tilt of the hips to maximize that hip extension. Now there's one last thing in this video that's a finishing move that if we don't do this, everything else that we try to change is going to be completely pointless and isn't actually going to result in us running any faster. Forward lean. This is the icing on the cake for great running form. Let's look at Eliud Kipchoge once again. Amazing forward lean. Now, rather than this being a product of you leaning forward through your hips, this is going to be a full body lean. So your whole body is going to be slightly tilted. The idea behind this forward lean is that you're trying to get this vertical movement that's coming from extending your knee into a plane that's actually going to produce more horizontal speed.
Too far and we'll start to overstride, and too little and we'll start to lose our hip extension. So we need to get it just right. Okay, I'll show you the full checklist.
So here's the final checklist with a few bonuses for your head position. Now a 60% grade is pretty damn good. I think I was around 80% or so. So I've still got some stuff to work on for sure. And you probably do too. And that's okay. Now if you want to learn a bit more about how to improve this checklist, then you're going to have to watch this next video when I make it soon. Peace.